Decoding the secrets of fraudulent emails. Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. I think that many more people fall for fake email scams and phishing attempts than we realize. It's one of the scammers' best ways to get our account credentials and more. What I'm going to do is take a couple of example emails that I've received recently and walk through a couple of the signs that they are in fact spam. So here's the message. Here's the spam we're talking about. You can see that Google has already correctly identified it as spam. But since I get so many of this particular variant, and not all email services actually mark this as spam, I want to walk through some of the signs that point out exactly what's going on here. The place to start, whenever you're not sure, is the from line. In this case, the from line looks like it's from me to me. In other words, it's being sent from support@askleo.com, which is a legitimate email address, to support@askleo.com. What that tells us, of course, is that, well, this is just spammers using this technique of from spoofing to basically try and make the email look a little bit more legitimate. If somebody that wasn't me, in other words, if this kind of email went out to somebody else, they could think, if they looked at the from, that it was actually from support@askleo.com, which, of course, it's not. But the red flag I want to point out here is that it's coming from the same email address that it's being sent to. Like I said, that's usually a big red flag. Unless you are regularly sending emails to yourself, that's something that just shouldn't happen. Now, there's also a yellow flag here, and it's one of those things where we can actually debate just how strong a flag it is. The way the wording turned out, storage accounts usually isn't a phrase that you would associate with email. Now, that's not always true. There are scenarios, especially when your email shares storage space with, say, your cloud services, such as, say, Outlook.com and OneDrive, but the wording just feels off. That's always something to pay attention to. Now, there's a really common flag that's not included in this particular email, and that is a scenario where when the email name, in other words, in this case above, it says support, and the email address don't relate to one another. For example, if we take a look at this example that I just manufactured, Microsoft email support at a completely random email address at some completely random domain. In other words, by random, I mean that the email address itself and the domain have nothing at all to do with Microsoft or email or support. That is a huge red flag and is probably one of the more common scenarios that you might check for when you're determining whether or not an email actually is legitimate or not. It's very common for the description, the name there, to not really match the email address that was used to send you the spam. Okay, let's move on to the body. The clues to look for in the body are inconsistencies and poor grammar. Again, it varies a lot. Grammar can run the gamut. Some are obviously horrible, and some are starting to get better. In the example above, there's an inconsistency that really bugs me as soon as I noticed it, and that is that there's this bar graph from 4.82 gigs to 4.86 gigs, trying to tell you something about how much space is supposedly being used by your email service. In this case, no, it's never going to be that narrow a bar, right? Your bar is usually going to start at 0 and then go up to some maximum. Note also that they've never said anything about just what the maximum is. They're actually asking you or assuming you will infer that the maximum is 5 gigabytes and you are approaching it, which is another inconsistency because they said your email is full, but if the bar graph that they want you to believe were true, it's not full. You've actually still got room for more email, including the spam email that you just got. Now, in this case, I've got a couple of quibbles with the grammar. On your email account is odd. Using email account in both sentences is somewhat cumbersome and unusual. But unfortunately, in this case, these are all things that are, I'll just say, within the realm of possibilities. In other words, I have seen legitimate email services send out email messages with just slight grammar oddities. But again, grammar is one of those things that you do want to pay attention to and understand whether or not you should expect really good grammar from the email service you're using. Generally, you'll have a good sense for just how good they are because you'll have gotten email from them in the past when you set up your account or when they promote their services. If the email that you're now getting seems inconsistent with the way they've written in the past, that too is kind of something to pay attention to. Now, there's one interesting red flag here that is really easy to overlook. Nowhere in this threat, or the entire email for that matter, does it even mention which email service it supposedly is. While many spam messages often try to be a little bit more convincing, this one is not. The lack of identification is a big red flag. A legitimate email from your legitimate email service would identify itself very, very clearly. Now let's look at the button. This is where things get really interesting. If I hover over the button, you'll notice that I've got this bizarre, lengthy URL that you'll be taken to. Now, the domain cloudflare-ipfs.com has nothing to do with your email provider. It's actually a legit domain, but it's not related to email. Particularly for messages relating to email usage, limits, or other problems, this domain should be clearly related somehow to the email service you're using, be it Outlook.com, Gmail.com, Google.com, or something else. The orange flag here, the link to get more storage and free up space is the same, makes it very suspicious. So, what happens if you click on the link? Well, for one thing, don't. Let me do it for you, and I'll show you what you get. In this case, you get a generic webmail sign-in. Once again, it doesn't have any indication for what service it's presenting this login for. You'll notice that any of the major services, whenever they have you sign in on the web, their logo is everywhere. This is a logo-free web login. So just by looking at it, we don't know what service it is. That's a red flag. The other red flag here is that this is very, very likely a sign-in page that you have never, ever seen before. Again, you know how your email service acts, what it looks like, what words they use, and so forth. And if you've ever logged in online, which for some of the services, of course, is how you access the email, but even for some of the others, they have online logins. You know what those look like. This doesn't look like that. And that is a huge red flag. Some scammers do set up a sign-in page that may look very, very similar to the real thing. Many of the characteristics of the email itself listed above, like unrelated domain names in the address bar or obscured and unrelated destinations for any links or buttons, can be a strong, strong sign that something is amiss. You can see that the goal is simple: to get you to enter your email address and your password, which then hands it over to the scammer. The account doesn't exist is likely the message you'll get regardless of how many accounts you entered correctly. Now, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the headers. Those are the headers or information that you don't normally see. Exactly how you find them will depend on the email program or email service you're using. In Gmail, for example, you would take a look for View Original, but there may be something called View Headers or more. So here are the headers from our example spam. They look like a lot of complicated stuff. One of the things to do to understand where the email is coming from is to locate the line that says from with the colon. The colon is actually significant. In our example here, it's on line 22. Ignore that line. Just locate it, but ignore what it says because, as we've said, the from line can be completely spoofed. There's nothing necessarily legitimate on it. However, if you go up one line to line 21, there is a received colon line there. Now, there may be other things in between, but what you're looking for is the received line that is the closest to the from line and above it. That tells us where the message originally entered the email stream from. Now, in our case, it claims to be from askleo.com, but the IP address that it includes is suspicious. I can tell you that it's not an askleo.com IP address, but of course you wouldn't necessarily know that. The thing to do then is to go to a Whois service. I happen to use whois.domaintools.com and look up the IP address, look up information about that IP address. The information for this one shows me that it's in Lithuania. I don't operate in Lithuania, I can tell you that for sure. That is one of the biggest signs that this is spam. Now, even if the email comes from a location that is not obviously one of those sources of spam that we talk about a lot, that doesn't mean it's good. You'll need to do some more research into exactly what's going on here. I do want to be clear, everything above that received line that we're looking at that has that Lithuanian IP address, that's all legit. All that is doing is documenting the email's path across the internet and into your inbox. The bottom line, of course, is to always remain alert, especially if you receive an email warning about your email account and that threatens some kind of consequence associated with not taking action. There's an urgency that's usually presented in these emails that is often intended to make you do things you wouldn't normally do. If you are concerned, delete the email. Don't click on anything in that email. Go to your email service provider directly. So, for example, if you're using Gmail, go to gmail.com. If there's a problem, you'll be notified there. If there's not a problem, which is likely the case, then there's nothing you need to do. You've kept yourself safe. Congratulations. For updates, for comments, for links related to this article and more, visit askleo.com/169355. I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.